Welcome back to Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Once you've bitten into the forbidden philosophical fruit, you can never go back to concentrated orange juice. Forgive the extravagance, but in this case, the fruit is recognizing how feeble the materialistic paradigm of science has become, and how other ontologies may well offer a better explanatory framework for how things have come to be, and for all the maddening anomalies that continue to pester the human experience with enigmatic phenomena. Concentrated orange juice, to complete this ridiculous formulation, is the vapid response we get from institutional authorities who reject even the possibility of a new approach outright, and thereby close their minds to new thinking. I apologize for the strange metaphors and anti-dogmatic doggerel, but this subject riles me up, something fierce. One of the early modern prophets of this most recent awakening, one of the first to help spear the beastly barking dogma of old science with a sharp stick, was retired philosophy professor and author Michael Grosso. He, together with several noted collaborators, wrote one of the best and most ardent refutations of the materialist paradigm, Irreducible Mind, Towards a Psychology of the 21st Century. His partners went on to complete a trilogy of books dedicated to bolstering the argument made in Irreducible Mind, and together they form a substantive and thoughtful case for consciousness being a fundamental part of the universe. Yet decades before, Grosso had penned an earlier consideration of consciousness, death, and the soul, the final choice, death or transcendence. Now updated, it's one of my favorite books, and frames humanity's current dilemma as a kind of species-wide near-death experience. How we respond and whether we adapt determines everything about our future. I had the privilege of sitting down with Michael Grosso in December and had a long and lovely conversation with this wonderful man. I hope you enjoy. There's two aspects to materialism. There's the philosophical, ontological aspect that we're all familiar with, reductionism, and then there's also sort of the economic system that we're caught up in, and they're related, and they're both pushing us, I think, toward collapse as a species. And so that notion that you write about in the final choice of a near-death experience for the planet and for the species causing this sort of psychic flip, I think is really on point, especially, right now we're staring down the barrel of another Donald Trump term as president.
Right.
And as that's happening, we have, Putin's power in Russia and this suddenly renewed threat for World War III. Europe's like building bunkers and stuff because they think the US is going to pull out of NATO. And things are looking really bleak. And it seems like we're even getting closer to that potential, calamity. And we're all going to be forced to reckon with what that means. And at the same time, like the UFO phenomenon is taking on all this weird urgency, and things are getting seen that are near-death experiences, and all that stuff that you talk about in the book are also still very current, and research into those is accelerating. So, to sum it all up, I feel like we're being asked to make that flip, and it's sort of an open question whether or not we will, which gets to your death or transcendence, right? Like, are we going to make that choice? And I think that we're still very much wrestling with that question. And so that's what I was hoping to talk with you about. And I know that it's interesting because like you said, it was the first book that you wrote. You wrote it in the 1980s, but then you updated it, and it only seemed to get more current as time went on, and that seems to still be happening for it.
I, I,
So,
I
and just to start off, I guess, how do you, how do you read the current situation, and how do you feel that, like, to have written something that seems to be proving prophetic in a lot of ways, and in diagnosing our current moment?
well, oddly enough, when I got your note and you mentioned my book, I went back and I've been looking at it, and I can't read the whole thing in a couple of days. And I'm surprised myself at how it speaks to the issues of our time. And you left out one massive threat. There are two, I think, major
Sure. Yeah.
threats. One of them is the drifting toward nuclear war, the signs of that, horrifying. Nobody wants it, but all the indications are it could be getting riskier. But the other thing is this the climate crisis. So we have two roads, as it were, two human processes that are unwinding, unfolding before our very eyes. And unless we stop, revise, and get on a new trail, It does look like we're moving in the direction of what might be the breakdown of world civilization. I mean, an atomic war with a climate catastrophe, it's not a nice picture for the human race.
Not at
But
all.
at the same time, as you point out, there are all these other indications and pointers from another source of consciousness and interest that's telling us there may be a way out of this looming catastrophe if we can tune in to some of the extraordinary human potentialities that are becoming more and more evident, particularly the near-death experience, which in the last year or so, I've been watching almost every day online on YouTube and listening to people tell their stories about their near-death experience. I've also read the books, and I know personally all the founders of the movement. In fact, I wrote the first review of Raymond Moody's book,
Oh,
and I became friends with him. I became friends with Ken Ring, who wrote a book about the near-death experience as well as the onslaught of alien phenomena. So that's the other thing that's happening. That's now the funny thing is why I was turned on or turned off the horror of it is that I've had experiences in both these areas. I had one major uh, UFO experience. I don't think it's in the final choice. I'm not sure if that's in it.
I don't think
Uh,
so. I don't remember reading
no,
it.
I could mention something about that if you tell that story briefly, if you like.
Yeah, I'd
But
like to actually, because that's my predominant subject a lot of the time. But
okay, and at the same time, I've had one major UFO experience, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I've had numerous. I've had almost every kind of paranormal experience that you can describe. Almost. Uh, some more frequently than others. And I've not only had the experience myself, I've witnessed it with other events in the world, and I've read about it. I mean, this is an enormous literature out there that is ignored thanks to the reductive materialist bias of the intellectual uh, uh, cadre of our species. It's not true for all, and every now and then somebody deep, heavy scientist has a near-death experience and or has an event changes them particularly. So, but anyway, maybe it might be of some interest that I'll just share very briefly my UFO experience.
yeah, yeah, please do.
And I mean, why I'm driven to do this is I have some direct experience that stimulates me in that direction. But the date there is 1971, and I was just about to have my get my PhD in philosophy from Columbia University, and it was April 23rd, uh, which happens to have been Shakespeare's birthday. I just knew that because I'm a big fan of Shakespeare. And my girlfriend's birthday, whom I was with on that evening in our apartment, we were living together in Greenwich Village in an apartment building on the top floor. And we were listening to music. It was Jane's birthday. We had gone out for dinner and we were just hanging out together, having fun, and listening to this wild music by John Coltrane. And
I love it.
yeah, so we're sitting there listening to this music, and I impulsively get up and walk to the window. And it was a beautiful, it was 11:30 at night. I have the time, I have almost the seconds, everything memorized, you know. And it was a gorgeous spring night, you know, it was April, and it was dark, of course, at 11:30, but the sky was a beautiful blue. So I'm staring out the window, patting my feet with the music, John Coltrane, right? The Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Important, that
Yeah,
title, okay?
yeah. Okay.
And wild music, by the way.
Yeah,
Completely, if you know this guy.
I do.
So
He's brilliant. I mean,
he's a genius, and
genius,
I
absolutely.
adore him. And
He's transcendent musically for sure.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm looking up into the sky, and suddenly a cluster of dazzling lights appear out of nowhere, and they start dancing in the sky in the rhythm that I'm listening to and tapping the floor with my foot. At the same time, I see on the right side of the lights an apparition of a human being, a man, a nice looking, normal, perfectly normal human being. He's smiling and he's grooving with the music too. And
Mm.
he's conveying to me, suddenly there I am, I'm partying with a total stranger in the air outside, and these lights that are dancing in tune with the music. So I said, "Hey, Jane, check this out." So she comes to the window and sees the same thing. And now here's what happened. We watched for maybe seconds, but seconds that were long seconds, right? Staring at this amazing thing. Suddenly the lights stop and they make a right turn about 3 blocks and they shoot down to the dome of the Church of Our Lady of Pompeii in Greenwich Village, which is a Catholic church for immigrants. And the lights perch on the dome and they're beaming at us. And for, again, a second or two. And then they take off and they come right back to where they were in the same spot in front of our building, dance around a little more just to make it clear that they were there for us, right? And then they went right again, this time in the nanosecond, in the classic zigzag fashion. They vanished over the Empire State Building. And okay, so Jane and I are looking at each other. Our minds are blown. So I said, let's go up the roof. And because it was top floor, and I like to go up on that roof anyway. And just that was my impulse. So we go up the roof, and lo and behold, there's another guy up there by the name of Louis, who lives in the same house. And get this, I had just turned him on to John Coltrane. He was a young musician. And as soon as I go up there, he's looking at me, his eyes are popping. Did you see that? So we have three witnesses, okay? Three witnesses to the same thing. Well, needless to say, the religious connection is there, right? We're listening to but it's not standard, let's say, religiosity. John Coltrane is the filtering mechanism there. But what's it all about? And so this was my first reaction was, I'm getting a message from out there. You're about to become a doctor of philosophy. That means doctor in Latin means wise. Well, figure this one out, buddy.
Yeah,
That was
yeah. Here's a riddle, right?
here's a riddle, you see. And since that day, and that's a long time ago, right? I've never forgotten it. And I, like you, got into studying ufology. I got to meet a lot of the leading, some of the stars in the field, just as I knew all the stars in the field of near-death experience. And of course, the my connection now that I see a connection between religion and UFOs for sure. There's some kind. The most spectacular example it would be the 1917 Marian vision, the vision of in Fatima. Three children saw the Virgin Mary. Do you know that story?
I do. You mentioned it in your book, and I've read Jacques Vallée's work on it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So he noticed the connection between UFOs and Marian visions before I did.
yeah.
And I got to know him, by the way, and he wrote a blurb for one of my early books. And I haven't been I mean to get in touch with him again, see where he's at. I know he's constantly thinking about this stuff. So there's a connection with religion. And for years, I was been thinking about this stuff, but more recently, the thing that has really been blowing my mind, and I'll just make this point and, and let you talk.
No, you're
I,
great, man. I love it.
I have been watching for about a year and a half, almost every day on YouTube, both near-death experiences and UFO encounters. These are people, all kinds of people. They're not, some of them are educated, or they could be cops, they could be farmers, just all kinds of people experiencing these things. And particularly, uh, I have been wrapped up in observing the near-death experiences. And I have come to the conclusion after watching so many different people describing in different ways, although there's the underlying fundamental structure of the NDE is constant throughout. But in every story, it's different.
Yeah.
But I have come to the sense, and it's like it's not just an abstract speculative idea, but a feeling that I'm literally immersed in another reality, in addition to the sensory world that I normally occupy when I'm in my waking state.
Yeah.
So of late, I have very much turned to, and I think I say this, I said all of these things in this early book of mine, but the emphasis on I'm literally at the edge of another reality. I want to go in. I'm not interested in just describing it and making a case for it in an intellectual way.
Yeah.
The next step, or for me at any rate, is the first step is to conclude after all my experiences and other people's experiences that there is this other dimension of reality and we're interacting with it all the time in different ways.
Yeah.
My feeling is we're at a crisis in world history that is unprecedented. And here, and I'm seeing this other dimension of reality creeping up on us, breaking through to us in various ways. And my goal now, and what I'm really interested in writing about and exploring, are actual ways in which we can, as it were, step into this other world. I think we have reached enough sort of spontaneous experience and enough intellectual daring and knowledge. I mean, still the exceptions. I mean, the majority of scientists are not thinking like this, but it's growing.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching the point where we can begin to actually talk about ways of actively exploring this other dimension of reality, not as a faint speculative possibility that blows our mind occasionally, but as a certain hypothesis or a convincing hypothesis. And so my drift now, where I'm pushing, is thinking about ways that we can get more and more people to to uh, devise methods of their own. I mean, whatever works to break through to this new reality that's imposing itself upon us and appearing in so many different ways. And so I have a new book planned. And frankly, I don't know if I'll do it because it's a huge task. But what I want to do is basically I've been collecting all kinds of accounts of the paranormal, all kinds of abilities that human beings have. And what I'm trying to do is take each facet of our potential evolutionary psychic abilities and unite them in the form of a model of the next step of human evolution. I feel that we're on the threshold of the necessity to evolve as a species.
Yeah.
Because if we continue on the path we're going, we have two things that we have to worry about: climate catastrophe and nuclear war. And as I don't have to tell you, you're aware of what's happening. I mean, the one half of the American richest country in the world that we are, economy is invested in weaponry. close to one half. And the Russians are trying to catch up. There, everyone out there, smaller countries. I think this is insanity.
Yeah.
And I think that as a rational human being and as a teacher, I was a teacher for 35, 40 years. I want to continue with my career as a teacher, but now I want the whole world to be my audience. Not that the whole
Yeah.
world's going to listen to one guy, but I'm reaching out. I want to make the connections and say, Antonio Guterres, by the way, the head guy at the UN, I think, has talked about this. And he says we need to learn how to live differently in order to survive this looming catastrophe. And that is a gigantic challenge. And my feeling is the material, the psychological and psychic potentiality for radical transformation, it's there. We have enough data to point in that direction. The question is, how do we persuade significant numbers of our brothers and sisters in the human race to take this seriously? And how do we go about changing the world consciousness?
Yeah.
And, there are speculations of uh, Jeff Kripal, for example. I don't know if you know his work.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
had him on the show. Yeah, yeah.
he's a fabulous guy, and I haven't been in touch with him for a while. I love him, though. And he's written a book, like I haven't written a book with that title, but on the super humanities. He was a humanities professor. So was I. I
Yeah.
taught for 35 years. So I think we have to continue in that task. To save humanities, we have to evolve the study of humanities. When I stopped teaching about 20 years ago, I was already getting turned off by what was happening in the world of higher education. What I was noticing, there was less and less interest in what we call the humanities, and more interest in college or university life as a way to prepare to be a success in our highly capitalistic society. And I found that utterly disgusting and self-destructive in the end.
Yeah.
So I think that my big idea in this book is to, number one, tell the story of all the different phenomena and how paranormal, supernormal phenomena, and how when you put them all together, you get an image of a type of human being that would represent the next step in the evolution of our species. And both the physical phenomena, the PK side and the ESP side. I'm particularly, of course, the PK side is totally fascinating, and I have all kinds of speculations about how that could be used if we began to take it seriously. But most important to me is the mental expansion that what we need. And I'm particularly interested, and I'm sure this is, if you've studied anything about the near-death experience, know that one of the most important moments of the near-death experience, not everybody has the experience, this particular item, but it's pretty constant variable.
Yeah.
And that is this telepathic, this empathic dimension of telepathy. Lots of people have telepathic experiences. I do regularly, minor stuff, I'd say. I've had major stuff, other PK stuff and precognitive, but there's something about telepathy that relates to our humanity in a vitally precious and important way. And that is, not only does the telepathic capacity that we possess, potentially all of us, I believe,
Yeah.
not only are we able to, as it were, connect with the content of the mind of another person or of another group of people or whatever, but the empathic dimension of telepathy lets us get into the psyche of the other person, not just on the surface, but
Mhm.
how he or she is experiencing the world. And that is the way to, I believe, that particular gift that some people have. And it's artists and poets more often than not that have that. or mystics or yogis, you see. But not only to get into the mind of the surface mind, but to see how they are reacting to us. And I'm sure you remember that. There are many cases where the person remembers all their interactions with the people in their lives, but in this extra dimensionally profound way that they see how they impacted on them in a harmful way.
Yeah,
But
it's like they look at the life review, but they also examine like their impact on other people and how those
exactly,
people felt through
exactly,
those interactions. It's like a
exactly,
karmic download of all of your, relationships, and it
right,
sounds, I mean, utterly profound.
exactly. And when that happens, you are disposed to forgive and forget, and to move in, in a new relationship toward people. At any rate, in this book I'm planning, and now and then I sort of throw out some speculations. I also talk about the physical ways in which, if we were to learn to evolve these capacities, and I think that we're capable of doing it, but we have to want to do it, you see.
Mm.
But there are all kinds of physical effects that could uh, radically change the way we live on Earth. For example, I'll just give one example, and this will sound weird to some people, but we know that saints and yogis and highly evolved spiritual people fast. They don't eat the way normal people do. And they can, and there are cases on record, which I review in various writings, a couple of cases where almost an entire lifetime was spent fasting, or 35 years. Okay, that's the number that, in the case of Teresa Neumann, a German mystic, for example, the Nazis knew, she lived in the 20th century, the Nazis knew that she ate nothing the last 35 years of her life, nothing, and was in perfect health and health. I mean, they knew about her, so they did not give her any rations for food, which is just an interesting, peculiar fact of history, that
Yeah,
the infinitely vile Nazis, well, they kind of respected her peculiarity, but they
yeah,
also, didn't give her the rations, which she probably would have given away to other people. But
exactly
anyway,
right. The Germans were known for their efficiency, so I guess that's
right, exactly, very point.
you know,
So there are different ways, and we could talk for hours and speculate about the various physical forms of the paranormal ability that people have. Uh, for example, I mean, this is going to sound wild and incredible, but it's a wild and incredible world that we
it
inhabit.
really is. It
And
is.
that is, there's lots of interesting, fascinating paranormal facets of transportation, of moving around in space,
Hmm.
and teleportation, bilocation. All of these things have been established, but they're rare phenomena. But that doesn't mean that that we could not eventually understand. And by the way, all of this is, I want science to come into this. This is science and the
Yeah,
paranormal. That's how I got it.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not some private religious fantasy that I have. And but what I'm suggesting is that if uh, we really paid attention to both the latent physical and mental extraordinary abilities that we latently possess, and we devoted ourselves as a species in unison to learning how to deploy these various brilliant, astonishing capacities that we only see manifest occasionally, we would have a new world. We could create a new world.
Yeah.
And it may be, it's, people say it's going to take a miracle, as a joke almost, to change the mind of, let's say, Donald Trump. It's a miracle to get Donald Trump. But I believe in miracles. I believe in extraordinary phenomena. And the reason I do is, A, my own experiences, and I've read extensively, and I've met people who have had extraordinary experiences. And I know people like yourself who are studying all of this. I'm not alone. I'm not just
Yeah,
one guy dreaming this fantastic idea.
yeah.
So,
I have a there's one theory that has been talked about, and I know that you're familiar with Krishnamurti
oh yeah, yeah.
and David Bohm. They had a friendship, and I've been talking with a Canadian scientist by the name of David Stuss, and he spent some time at a Krishnamurti center in British Columbia and had some pretty profound experiences there. And David Bohm and Krishnamurti apparently at one point have had sort of a discussion about an idea that a certain number of people, if they can initiate this change in consciousness, it might sort of instill a kind of a phase change more broadly, that like at least it would make it a lot easier for other people to make that same shift once this sort of minimum level of conscious awakening had happened in a smaller group of people. So, I mean, I don't know that we'd have to go around and convince all the Donald Trumps of the world as much as if we got enough people convinced as a sort of a root movement that that could spread more quickly among the folks who maybe aren't plugged in as,
Well, that's
um,
my hope, and that in some kind of plausibly reasonable way. I like to think about it this way: if a person was warned that if he continues to smoke, he will get cancer, and if he gets proof that he's definitely going to get it,
mhm,
but he hasn't got it yet, he's going to do something about it. And he's going to do things that ordinarily he wouldn't. If a person knew that they're overweight and that they're on the verge of, having a ghastly breakdown of their whole system, unless he or she is in some way self-destructive or just retarded, they're going to do something about it.
yeah,
So it may be as this world scene process evolves and gets worse. I don't see any sign of it getting better. It may
no,
be that things are going to, we will have to wait. In the meantime, of course, if we're conscious and mean well, we should be doing whatever we can
yeah,
to advance this evolution of consciousness, which is so necessary, I believe.
yeah.
But I think as circumstances, planetary circumstances become more terrifying, dangerous, and frightening, that more and more people will respond to the call, as it were, and participate in some kind of a larger movement
I
toward.
think and I think there's some evidence that that's already happening.
I
I
think
mean,
you're right.
these
I think that
conversations are accelerating online. I mean, and
they are.
there's,
They absolutely are. And we just curiously or luckily now have the technology to be aware. I mean, I turn on the YouTube and I watch somebody in Asia describe their near-death experience, and I could write them. I mean, I don't necessarily, but absolutely, yeah, we can. And there's so much valuable information out there that is becoming increasingly relevant, rather increasingly relevant and available to anybody who wants to learn. I
yeah,
mean, you can do tutorials and all kinds of things online right now.
yeah.
Uh, so,
Well,
uh,
leads into another question I had. I mean, you're talking about like sort of encouraging people to and yourself like trying to experience this other reality that you feel is like interspersed with ours or sort of merging with ours in a lot of ways.
mhm.
What would you say from your own experience are the most efficacious ways of trying to engage that? I mean, what have you used? Are you using any kind of method, or how would you advise people to try and explore
Well,
that for themselves?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's a major part of this book I'm planning. All the
Okay.
different ways, you see, there are
Yeah.
all kinds of ways that are on record, so to speak.
Yeah.
As for myself, I have some peculiar. Um, well, first of all, there are common things that everybody knows about meditation.
Yeah.
Let me make this simple point. It's not it's a big point, but it's simple, and one that I like to share.
Sure.
Consciousness uh, is, of course, the key, and it's each of us is a conscious person, but normally our consciousness for a normal human being, and this is perfectly proper and to be expected, is dedicated to dealing with the physical world. We have senses that we need to discriminate, to find food, to get jobs, to live, to work. So we definitely have our consciousness is wrapped up and meshed in normal earthly problems and concerns. But the secret is if somehow we can learn, even as we're trying to live and function as human beings, if we can increasingly acquire a method and explore methods that will take our attention, our consciousness, and just shift it away. But I mean, you do that when you meditate a little bit. You meditate for an hour, and maybe you're staring at a candle, and the world lights up for you, and it's beautiful for a while. But you can still feel the world around you. You see, you're not like the person who has a near-death experience. The near-death experience is the key here, because in the near-death state, your entire consciousness is no longer functioning because the brain has stopped functioning. The heart stops breathing when it is arrested. It instantly stops the functioning of the brain. And so, what happens to this thing called consciousness? Well, it's now free to flow into the field of our awareness. And that's is exactly what seems to happen. Now, I wrote a book on St. Joseph of Cupertino, who was the most famous levitator of all time.
Yeah.
And I realized that as I was writing this book, I was also reading about near-death experience. What St. Joseph did was, in effect, by meditating, by fasting, by responding to his archetypal images that turned him on, like the Madonna, for example, uh, he basically imported his consciousness away from everything normal and routine and even, you might say, biologically life affirming.
Mhm.
And as a consequence, in fact, I demonstrate this in the book that I wrote about Joseph, that he, in effect, through his practices, spiritual practices, achieved the near-death state of pure openness to consciousness. Then I was struck by the irony of it, that a great saint like Joseph has to spend his whole life, every day, every way, detaching his consciousness from the mundane. And then he gets this fantastic insight and this transformation and all the rest. Whereas an ordinary person can have a near-death experience and get a glimpse of that, and they're almost instantly transformed. There's
Yeah.
so many stories about that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that every person who has a near-death experience is a saint like Joseph,
Mhm.
but they're different. Yeah, they're trying to live in the mainstream world, but they have gotten to that insight suddenly. And my idea is if we can figure ways out to speed up without having to literally come close to death.
Yeah.
And you asked some of the ways. Well, psychoactive substances do play a role.
Sure.
And I have to say that I've had enough uh, psychoactive adventures to say that I've learned something.
Mhm.
And I do, now that it's legal in my state, I do smoke weed.
Mhm.
And what I've learned about weed, I mean, I remember when the first times when I used to hang out with people that got high, they would get drunk or they would say, get the yummies. They would eat food, you see.
Mhm.
But that's not what interests me. When I get high, it feels as though I'm opening a lid and letting out forms of consciousness that normally, however open I may be, they just don't come forth. So I may be deluding myself, but as I'm writing, for example, I'll get a, a word will come to me that I need in a sentence that I've never learned before. I've never learned the word before, and then I'll look it up in the dictionary, and it's precisely the
Okay.
word.
Can I share something with you real
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't want to do all
I
the
was
talking.
watching some silly show with my daughter the other day,
Uh,
and this was really weird, and I got kind of, I mean, not freaked out, but I was very much startled by it. A dinosaur popped up on the screen, and I had
uh-huh.
never seen this. I mean, it's a typical kind of dinosaur, but I'm not a dinosaur person. I never have been. And if I had to think of what the name of this thing was, I would have thought of like Brontosaurus or something like that from back when I was a kid.
Right.
But Diplodocus, the word, popped into my head,
Ah,
and I had no idea.
what is the word?
uh, Diplodocus.
Diplodocus.
Yeah, Diploducus. And that's the name of this particular breed of dinosaur.
Oh, okay.
And I had never heard it. And
Ah,
I don't know, I never learned it, but it
uh-huh.
just emerged as soon as I saw that creature on the television, the name for it popped into my head. And that's kind of stuff has been happening more and more as my meditative practice has gotten more intense. I'm really trying to be disciplined about it
Uh-huh.
and spend a lot of time doing it. And um, but those kinds of things and slight precognitive moments where like I'll
Yeah.
know if my daughter's going to hit a particular softball or where it's going to
Uh-huh.
go, you know,
Uh-huh.
have been happening more and more frequently.
Yeah.
The more I try to engage in this stuff. But you mentioned like a word popping in your head. I didn't know the word Diplodocus, but it came to me and I knew that that was the name of the species of this
Uh-huh.
dinosaur, even though
Right.
I had no reason to, you know, I mean, how do you explain that? I don't know, but it
Yeah,
was
well,
just
that's
bizarre.
it does show that there is the seeds of extraordinary powers lie in all our minds. But
Yeah.
normally we're working with a surface mind that's designed to interact with the world and enable us to function as biological entities.
Yeah,
But
survive.
then
Yeah.
we have other moments. Sometimes they're natural things. If you have an accident, I mean, I mentioned earlier about a person that was hit, by a horse, and things happen where you are knocked out of the normal mode of consciousness, and it could be a slight thing, but still highly significant and interesting. That word is totally bizarre that you just cited. To me, I never heard of the word of that word.
Yeah, and I hadn't either. It's so bizarre.
And I frequently have when it's small scale, but a little buzz, and I'm writing, and I get these words. So, and not only that, I mean, the creative part. The other thing I was going to say that I do, that's I feel that the arts are very important here, even though science is a crucial element in the whole adventure of the new mind or the future humanity that we are discussing right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, but we need. I lost the train of my thought. What was I just saying?
You were saying the arts are important.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. In terms of my model of the futuristic evolution of humanity,
Mhm.
uh, I think the arts are very important part. I mean, I think it was Keats who said about Shakespeare that he had negative capacity, meaning he could empty his mind and he could imagine how a criminal or a murderer or a woman suffering from lost love or whatever, that he basically, the poet empties himself, and he is enabled not just to remember a word, an unusual word, but to create a character or to understand a situation that's unprecedented.
Yeah.
So we can evolve our consciousness in many different ways if we felt the urgent need to do so. I find the urgent need to do it because it's more fun. It's just
Yeah,
plain interesting to
exactly
try
right.
this stuff, and practical too. And I'm constantly emphasizing to myself and to whomever I'm talking to, that how there are ways that we can enhance our everyday life, even as we're expanding the more spiritual dimension that we need to survive as a species. But, so,
That's all amazing. What do you think was the first moment that you began to grok this transcendent realm? I mean, you mentioned the UFO sighting that you had. Was there an awakening moment that you had where uh, prior or after that where you suddenly realized that this universe isn't as simple as physical, billiard balls colliding together, but that there's
right,
intrinsically
right,
maybe some meaning involved or some deeper
yeah.
level?
Well, I remember the first ESP experience I had, and
Okay.
I was 5 years old.
Oh,
I
wow.
had moved to we had moved around the corner to another house with bigger, more rooms because I had my sister, younger sister, was coming to join us and was being about to be born. And so the kids, what I remember distinctly, and I can still see it because it's a totally trivial thing. But I had a dream one Saturday morning that I was playing ball with a kid on the block that I had never talked to or yet gotten to know.
Mhm.
His name was Johnny, and he uh, we had no connection whatsoever. But I dreamt I was playing handball with him, off the wall, we called it, in the apartment building in Astoria, Queens, where I lived. So I have this vivid dream, because that's an indication of not UFO, but paranormal dreams tend to be very vivid. I had this vivid
Yeah.
dream that I'm playing ball with this kid. Saturday morning, I get up, have breakfast, I step out, and there he is with a ball in his hand. And he says, want to play off the wall? And we did. That, what could be more trivial, right? But
Yeah, but
nevertheless, I remember this. I was 5 years old, and I can still remember it. I had the dream, and so right from the beginning, I've had. But I have to say that didn't change my worldview at 5 years old.
yeah,
But
you were still
I'm
shaping a
trying to
worldview,
think.
right?
Uh, I've had uh, many of my paranormal experiences with women for some reason, and so I remember the paranormal experiences that shocked me, uh, partly because there's the flavor of a female companion or lover or whatever
Yeah.
girlfriend was part of the story.
And
But
that
I
also helps you to substantiate it. I mean, if you're by yourself and these things occur, you can
well,
second guess it. But if you have someone who's there with you, I mean, I'm
right,
sure that
right.
helps.
And so Jane, for example, I mentioned the UFO experience that I had.
Mhm.
I was with her, and I just recently tried to get in touch with her. No, she got in touch with me after 50 years. Okay,
Wow.
and out of the blue, and then she stopped because she had some problems with her family, and I wanted to talk more, but I wrote her an email and I said, "Do you remember what happened on that day?" And I specified the day. And she did. She wrote back and a clear statement of, so as you say, that confirms the reality. But to answer your question, there are many, many ways of altering our consciousness,
Yeah.
from fasting, from meditating. But I think the important thing is to understand, to have an intuition about the nature of consciousness, which is magnetically attracted to the mundane. That's what it's there for. It's not the whole story, because at a deeper level, we're connected with each other. And when you have a near death experience, it seems to show that we are right on the verge of being in another reality. It's just the fact that we're absorbed, and rightfully so, in dealing with the world that we happen to be in at this moment.
Yeah.
Not a permanent setup, though, as we know. We're going to leave. So
There's
I
a
yeah.
there's a podcast right now called The Telepathy Tapes
Oh,
that has been released in the last. It's actually, I think, they released the last episode of the first season just recently, and it follows a doctor who has been studying kids who are non-verbally autistic.
ah,
And these are kids who have a really hard time in their own bodies, like they don't have a whole lot of motor control, and
mhm,
they're nonverbal, so they can't carry on conversations like you and I do, and they are very much locked inside their own heads most of the time. Now, these
right.
kids are in the process of learning how to communicate through spelling. So they have
Mhm,
like some of them will have be assisted in typing, and other kids started that way, but then get to where they can actually type out like sentences and stuff on an iPad, um, and eventually communicate all on their own. But what they're
mhm,
communicating is that they are living in a whole different realm outside of the physical a lot of the time, and that
right.
they have relationships among each other kids like them that they know, and they meet in a place that is not in the physical universe, but apparently in some sort of like astral
Mhm,
domain. And
mhm,
they also develop telepathic communication with their caregivers,
mhm,
especially their mothers. And there's a doctor who has gone through. Diana Hennessy is her name, and she's gone through and um, charted the communication and has found veridical proof that they are communicating and reading their caregivers' minds. To the
uh-huh,
point where like they'll be in different rooms of the house or different locations entirely, and the child will be able to report what the mother is seeing at that moment through her eyes at
mhm,
another
mhm,
location.
mhm,
And it strikes me that it's exactly what you're talking about, where these kids are not able to be distracted by the physical, sort of getting along because they are, they have limits to their senses, and they also their physical movement. And so they're wired in to this realm on a permanent basis. And it's more of an exception for them, it seems like, to come to this realm in order to communicate and move around than
oh,
the other way around. And
wow.
it's really fascinating work. I actually had a documentarian, Kai, who is making the podcast on the show to talk about it. But it's
Uh-huh.
exactly what you're saying, and it basically dramatically underlines your point that like if we can figure out how to break away from the workaday world and figure out how to, um, you know, at least in certain moments, remove our consciousness from that level and go in, that there's
Mhm.
a whole universe to be discovered, and that capacity is in everybody.
I think if people knew and believed in this reality, this greater reality, because there's there's an aesthetic aspect to it. I mean, what fascinates me, in listening to these near-death experiences and experiences like what you just described, is that what this other world is, it's beautiful and it's informative and it's transformative. It's worth devoting yourself to exploring ways of getting inside that world.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that's sort of the key to this model that I'm imagining, that we have to sort of turn people on to the possibilities that are latent in every one of us. And it turns out that, as you point out, people who are mentally deficient or their brains are not operating properly, they very often have extraordinary abilities, extraordinary memories. Art is a big thing, and that's one of my methods of tuning in to this world.
Yeah.
Well, I've been painting since I was a boy. In fact, I was drawing before I learned how to write.
Yeah.
And I've in the past 2 decades, I've been living by myself because my marriage ended, and I've basically just been writing and painting, and have not resumed relationships, or I haven't even tried for some reason. I figure if it happens, it'll happen. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, But so art is another a way of exploring and of allowing yourself to tune in to dimensions of your own mind. I find myself doing things that I've never done before, just with my drawings, for example, or the paintings. And anybody can do that. You can try it, but again, we need some kind of super humanities program, and how that's going to happen on a large scale. I mean, it does happen. There's a lot of stuff going on today about folks that are trying to revive their indigenous beliefs and practices. I mean, I think the climate catastrophe is encroaching on so many different kinds of people, including people who are suffering most, but have the least ways of dealing with it. But they're turning to their primitive, primary modes of reacting to reality. So I'm very interested in all shapes and forms of meditation, fasting, rituals. I'm very fascinated by the ancient Eleusinian mystery cult in ancient Greece. A lot of people don't know this, but for 2,000 years in ancient Greece, there was an annual ritual in which you fasted for 9 days. There was a lot of dancing, and this was the cult of Demeter. It was based on the cult of Demeter and Persephone, the goddess of the underworld. And what you did after and imagine fasting for 9 days, getting into music and dancing, and then at the climax of the end of the dancing and the fasting, they in, uh, ingested a koukion, which means a drink, a brew. And scientists have figured out it was a psychedelic. It was somewhere between beer and LSD, okay? But these people got wiped out and when they finally did this. And there's all kind of classical references to people who had this experience and they had no fear of death. That was the thing. They were
Yeah.
convinced just the way the near-death experience. So in other words, for 2,000 years, the ancient Greeks had this amazing ritual, wonderful books written about it. And it's then they canceled it when Catholicism took over. I'm not going to dump on Catholicism, but
No,
there
I hear you.
and a Catholic emperor, not an emperor, a pope or something, forgotten his name, decided to cancel. It was in that stage in between the pagan and the rise of the Christian religion. But that was a mistake.
Yeah.
I would rather do an Eleusinian mystery thing than swallow a wafer in the Catholic. I mean, that sounds kind of stupid what I just said. I take it back. I don't want to sound crude, but I'm just very interested in indigenous in various ways, more vivid. I mean, my idea when I was a kid and I became a soldier of Jesus, I grew up in the Catholic thing,
Mhm.
Catholic Church. And by the way, no complaints, all nice people, good family. It's not
Yeah.
but I remember the event when I was confirmed. Uh, you went up to the priest and he gave you a little slap on the face, and that was supposed to transform my consciousness. It doesn't work that way. If you look at a native Indian vision quest, the young man goes out into a wild wilderness by himself for days on end, doesn't eat, fast, because the more you fast, the more you're going to start having psychic experiences. You're by yourself. When you're alone, you're more tuned in. And there are many wonderful books written about this phenomenon of native Indian vision quest. Beautiful, wonderful stuff. And it's always a unique discovery of your own. It's not
Yeah.
a mechanical thing, you see. So we
Well, so
can,
that's a good point. I mean, like in terms of what normal people can do, the models exist, right? I mean, these are things that, I mean, and we just have to give ourselves permission to try and kind of recreate our own model of how to go about doing that, right? I mean,
Exactly. We have to feel the need to do it.
yeah,
And many people are experiencing that need. And, we have people suffering from all kinds of mental ills today. And I think some resurrection of spiritual practices that are suitable, not
mhm,
forced upon you, not said,
yeah,
if you don't do this, you're going to hell. Or if you don't do this, you're a piece of shit. No way, that's not the way to enlighten the human race. But then different people have different sensibilities. I
mhm,
mean, if you're a woman, your sensibilities are going to be different, and openness to spirituality and transformation may be very different for a woman than for a man,
yeah,
and for different personalities. But you hit on the right point. But people have to see that it's worth pursuing,
yeah,
that it's needful to explore these hidden dimensions of our inner talents and psychic abilities, uh, to be to survive as an individual, but as well as a species, to have new attitudes toward life itself. I mean, I'm sure you and I could sit down and make a list of all the different steps that need to be taken
yeah,
uh, to transform our otherwise frighteningly violent species. I mean, today it's a frightening world to be in. And I mean, we take it for granted in America. People just shoot each other every day. There are people, just young people, old people, crazy guys just decide to get a gun and shoot as many people. It's constant. It's crazy. So somehow we have to wake up to the need to transform our consciousness. And that's the thing. It's not by getting richer or more powerful that the world is going to be better. It
yeah.
takes a little soul and heart is what's lacking, and consciousness in its various deeper modalities. Um,
That's a great place to end it, Michael. I deeply appreciate this.